Okay, brother, I'm super excited to share. Let me let this live feed load, and as soon as it's done, I'll let you know.
Nice.
All right. Thanks for carving time out of your day. I appreciate that. And I know our followers are going to appreciate that as well.
No worries. I was actually like, yeah. Julie was like, when's it going to be over? I was like, oh, it should be about an hour. Like, knowing that, I'll probably be like, hey, I got to go. I got afternoon patients. Like, it's just.
Okay, I think we're good to go, brother. Okay, so welcome everyone. This is going to be a super exciting and super special presentation that we've got going on today. Today I'm speaking with my clinical director, our clinical director in Cincinnati, and my partner, Dr. Seigler. He's going to be sharing with us, basically tips on how to keep your kids as healthy as possible. So this will be geared towards all parents, not just parents dealing with children with ADD, ADHD, or even people who have more severe conditions or significant conditions like autism or Asperger's or anything like that. We're going to be talking about general health concepts. We're going to be talking about the things that we see in clinical practice that show up that may not show up in traditional lab testing. And we're going to share with you what those labs look like and what common findings are. So first and foremost, welcome, Jared. I appreciate you sharing your time and your lunch with us today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Sachin. As you know, the topic of children is like really near and dear to my heart because this next generation coming up has a lot of 8 balls kind of in the way as far as from environmental exposure, food supply. It's just we see some of the most genetically susceptible kids being exposed to one of the worst environments we could like possibly imagine. So instead of, just blaming these children's brains and things like that, we need to try to figure out first and foremost what in the environment is affecting the brain. Because as you know, clinically, we're going to see way more than just, nervous system dysfunction.
Absolutely. So why don't we dive right in? Let's talk about the problem first. Like, how many children are affected by, health and chronic health issues that we're seeing today? And let's maybe just start with ADD and ADHD. How many children are impacted by it today statistically?
Right now, we're looking at about 1 out of 6. Some says about 20% too. So it's very common, but it's not really normal. If we look at just the spectrum of all these chronic type diseases like asthma, allergies, spectrum disorders, things like that, it's like 50% of the kids. So most of these kids have something going on. And that's where whenever what else is going on, those are like huge clues as far as where do we need to try to dive in to address them clinically. Like if I see a kid with a constantly runny nose and red cheeks and they're just hitting people and running around and can't control themselves, I know that brain is on fire 24/7. We just have to figure out how are we going to put it out and what's the source of it. So, I mean, it's just like right now, all of the disease processes are doing this for children. They're not showing any sign of slowing down.
Yeah. And from what I've been hearing, is that this is the first generation of children that's going to live a shorter lifespan than their parents. So it's kind of scary to think about this, the future that our children have ahead of them. And it's not just their future, but it's the future of the parents as well that are trying to raise these children. And of course, we're big proponents of natural healthcare and really not even natural healthcare, but the fact that you shouldn't need healthcare, especially in children. And not to make this political or to attack any form of medicine, because I think that every person who's in the healthcare industry is trying to do their best with the tools and the knowledge and the information that they have. But the intention of this presentation today is to show people perhaps an alternative. If you've gone the allopathic route and you're looking for, perhaps a root cause resolution to what's going on with your child, and even if you have a healthy child, how do you optimize a child's health? That's what we're going to discuss today. So we both have children. You've got a beautiful daughter, Adeline, and I've got Devin. And, so we are coming from a parent's perspective. We're not coming from reading something in a textbook or just going to a course and learning about it and then just spitting it out. We're raising superhumans. That's one of the things that I want to get across to everyone is we love our children. We love your children. And we want to do whatever it takes to keep them as healthy as possible, because as a parent, I can't imagine what it'd be like to have a child who's not functioning optimally, especially when we all know what the human potential is. And, us adults who are older now, had the privilege of growing up relatively healthy compared to the children today. And we're seeing such a huge rise in childhood illnesses. And it's just going to carry over into teenage years and adulthood and into middle ages and older ages. So we want to do whatever we can to help, optimize our child's health, given the environments that we're in, given the circumstances that we're under. And so let's just dive right into it. So, why don't we talk about what is the current approach? Just for those of you watching, let's talk about what can somebody expect what are the symptoms of ADD, ADHD, and then what can somebody expect if they go and see the doctor?
Well, the symptoms are exactly that: hyperexcitability, inattention to focus. They can't maintain focus, and that's just kind of that energy problem. And this is where the dichotomy to me occurs, because like you were saying, every doctor wants to do good. So it's not necessarily the pediatricians, it's the system that they're in. Because what the system allows is just for the label to be given of ADD, ADHD. And then the system, typically just insurance, allows for, well, here's a drug for that label. And then that's kind of it. It's up to the doctor to try to educate the patient more about, hey, what are some underlying things that we can look for and address and talk about? And that's where sometimes things just get swept under the rug all the time, because, to a neurologist, nothing happens below the brain. That's the way the system is designed. So, usually we see a lot of gut issues going on, because as you know, the nervous system, the immune system, and the gut, they kind of all develop in tandem. It's like this three-legged stool. So typically when we see it fall one way, it's going to roll over on the other side too. And so we need to see kind of where is this pendulum swinging. And it's usually because the problem is we look at these lab values that are so extreme, and sometimes they don't even run values. I saw a child just, he's, showing signs of malabsorption, failure to thrive. He's not tracking along with his peers. And whenever we started to just look at his iron, his RDW was a 22.4. So that means that the size of his red blood cells isn't being regulated because his anemia is so big. And we just look and we see that he has these critters in his gut that are taking the iron from him, because if he takes an iron supplement, he just poops it out. It's just, he gets diarrhea from it. So, we don't necessarily, and that's where people might need these minerals and vitamins, but with us, we always need to focus on the why. So for this kid, we have to kill the little critters. And the reason why I bring up iron is because that's a foundational issue for energy production. Among kind of everything else, oxygen's only very, very important for all functions. So if we can get this kid's iron stabilized, well, now the mitochondria can start to build these iron clusters, and now these engines can start turning, and now the brain can start to wire itself and develop, and now we won't have this malabsorption. So just because we see it here, because that's what the pediatrician is saying is, hey, we're not meeting milestones, we have to look at, well, what other kind of internal metabolic milestones aren't being met?
So, of course, the question that most parents probably have, and I would have as well, is what precipitates this? Like, where does this problem actually start? Is it preconception? Is it while the baby's in the womb? Is it post delivery? Where would you say this problem really starts?
Honestly, I'd say for all of them, preconception, because there's been cord studies done where they just find toxins in every single umbilical cord tested. So it permeates our society. Glyphosate, even if you buy organic, like glyphosate's everywhere. It's, the fields, the organic fields are right down the road from the non-organic ones, and there's hundreds of metric tons being sprayed all the time. So it's where we see is a lot of triggering effects of these maybe developed genetic predispositions can do it, mother exposures too. So while the baby's in the womb, a lot of things can potentially prime the immune system in the brain, which can be very problematic because, a lot of women that are pregnant still have to maintain like this really high-paced lifestyle, and all the cortisol and all the adrenaline and everything is coursing through that baby's blood too. So they get the same hormones and things like that. So we actually see plasticity in parts of a developing brain changing based on mother's hormones and inflammatory states. It's really kind of awesome when you think about it. But then that's the crux, is it can also be a negative too, because if a woman is maybe an unplanned pregnancy, she can't stop working, maybe 2 jobs because ends have to be met and things like that. Now, unfortunately, this baby's brain and everything is going to kind of be a bystander of what is this environment imposing on us. And then we see a lot of other cumulative things. Have there been any traumas? Did the child get sick? Food, like what's the blood sugar imbalance? And I mean, blue light, that's another one too. So that's where we have to look at the history of, what are these triggering events that happen at 3 years, 18 months? Were they born this way? I get told that a lot too. And that's where we kind of have to backtrack, because as you know, with functional medicine, we know the health of the baby can be determined well before a mother becomes pregnant, as far as microbiome status, epigenetic expression, big fancy words. So that's where to me, the major focus has to be environment, both internal and external, if we're going to make any headway.
Okay, perfect. So, for those of you that don't have children that are looking to raise healthy children, it might be worth your while, investigating your health prior to conception and evaluating yourself for toxicity, evaluating yourself for stress. I had a patient that I was working with many years ago, and one of the things that she said is she hates her job. And I asked her, if your child was born, would you take it to work with you? And she says, no way, I can't stand that place. It's so toxic. And I had to remind her that if she gets pregnant, she's going to be taking the child with her to work every single day. And so we tend to forget that when the baby is conceived, it's becoming very familiar with the environment that you're in. The hormones that you're producing will change the landscape of that baby's development, and it'll also signal to the baby what kind of environment it's going to be born in. And certainly, toxicity is a huge issue, especially in women, because a lot of the toxins that we're exposed to tend to affect women more than men because of the estrogen component and interference with estrogen metabolism. I was actually talking to a friend of mine this morning, and he was talking about the city of Sarnia. And in the city of Sarnia, they have the highest population ratio of women girls being born relative to boys because of the toxicity. And there's a native tribe up there that hasn't had a male born in several years because of, again, the toxicity that people are exposed to. So, there's a lot of this going on, and, infertility rates are on the rise, of course. And, that's something that, is worth investigating. Why is it difficult for people to get pregnant? Maybe it's the body's way of telling that person that they're not, chemically ready. Maybe they're emotionally ready, but maybe they're not biologically ready to have a child, because a child's health might be compromised in that environment, in those stressors they're facing. So, I appreciate you sharing all of this. Let's talk about, a functional medicine approach. So what is it like when somebody comes to see you? And before you answer that, I do want to thank everyone for joining us, and I appreciate everyone sharing and liking and showing some love. It just makes this all worthwhile. We're doing this for you guys, so we really appreciate you sharing this and tagging your friends, because again, 1 in 6 to 1 in 5 children are dealing with some sort of issue, which means that for every child that's dealing with a health issue, 2 parents and 2 grandparents, probably 4 grandparents rather, are dealing with that child's health issue. So this really impacts, every generation in our society. So again, thanks for sharing and thanks for joining us. I appreciate all of you. But let's talk about that. What is the difference between, a traditional allopathic approach and a functional medicine approach? What are you looking for that a traditional practitioner might not be looking for?
In reality, I would kind of say basic metabolic dysfunction, what's kind of thrown a wrench in everything, instead of just focusing on that ADD, ADHD label. Because, at the end of the day, for most kids, and again, you can't throw everyone underneath this umbrella, but for most children or most brains, it's just an energy production issue. Be it there's not enough catecholamines, be it there's not enough dopamine to turn into catecholamines, so they have enough acetylcholine, what's their glutamate to GABA ratio. So you can use all these big words, but really we have to figure out this underlying metabolic dysfunction, and we have to kind of reverse engineer from, okay, we have a high demand of energy for the prefrontal cortex. We're not making energy enough to focus, and how do we get back from there? And this is where, to me, a physical exam is huge. I mean, you can see iron deficiency anemias, you can see zinc issues. So looking at a child, watching how they walk, if they can talk, things like that can be these huge clinical pearls. Plus, we already know maybe potentially what hasn't worked. So usually when we see a lot of kids, they've already maybe run a lot of testing potentially as far as blood and things like that. And, I have people ask me all the time, oh, well, I tested positive for candida and I've been taking this, will it kill it? And I say, well, if you've been taking it and it's positive, the answer is no, in a nutshell. So what hasn't worked? What has worked? This is where we have to really evaluate a history. And I don't think that varies too much from the allopathic model, but from a functional model, we're focused more on how is the spider webbing out to affect different symptoms. And then from there, we always just kind of, as you know, start from the gut, because to me, that's kind of the foundation of anything that we're going to do. And if we have critters down there, it's a 24/7 stress. I say, if I broke into your home, you're not going to worry about meditating and cooking dinner. All your resources now are to getting me out of the house. So maybe prioritizing on developing and regulating the nervous system or the front part of the brain and things like that, that might not be a high priority.
Another thing to point out is that it's difficult to run, traditional labs on somebody via blood work, or it's obviously you're not going to do a functional MRI on a child's brain. It might be very difficult to do that. So the nice thing that functional medicine testing allows you to do is very non-invasive testing. So from a very young age, you can collect a stool sample from a child. You can even collect a urine sample if necessary. Do you have any labs that you want to share? Maybe we can show some common findings that you see so people can probably take a look at the difference of what those labs look like versus the traditional labs that they're getting.
Yeah, I mean, we can throw up a few labs and everything just to kind of see. And, I got a stool test and also an organic acids test too. So that way we can kind of see a couple of things that need to be potentially looked at and going on.
Yeah, and I also want to encourage everyone who's watching. We've got quite a few people watching, and I appreciate that. If you have any questions, please post them, because we like to, make this about you and make this about your kids. So if you've got any questions, we're happy to answer them as best we can. And if we don't know the answer, we're not going to, lie to you. We're going to get back to you. So we're always happy to answer your questions. And, Jared is just an encyclopedia of knowledge. So I definitely want all of you to leverage his brain while he's on this call right now.
So let me share my screen real fast. See me good? See me okay? All right, cool. So this is where we just started to look at a stool test. We can see there is some normal bacteria that are just elevated where they shouldn't be. But this is where we start to see a couple things. There's some Klebsiella and Mona present. It's not high enough for the lab to flag it. It's still there. Same thing with some staph, and this child did complain of having staph infections as well. These can sometimes just look like upper respiratory tract infections. Again, with the word pneumonia, it's not hard to be a doctor. You just got to speak Latin, right? So, that could be even bronchitis or pneumonia and genetically or immunocompromised kid. But here's where we see some blasto. And, these are parasites, these little single-celled organisms. They wreak havoc. There's a lot of competition for resources, but these blastos really deplete the brain of GABA, which is kind of like the brake system as far as getting it to regulate when do I fire, when do I not fire, because glutamate's the gas and the pedal to the metal can eventually burn the engine out type mentality. So this is going to be like a constant excitatory state, because we can also see there's a yeast called Microsporidia. So this is typically from like a water source. Now, so that would indicate a lot of people are exposed to it. But again, why is this child the one where the immune system can't bat it down, can't figure out, hey, I'm supposed to get these things? However, we can see inflammation in the GI tract with this calprotectin being high. And the old saying is, a gut on fire is a brain on fire. So we have to start addressing this underlying constant state of stress, constant state of inflammation, constant resource competition too. And then we just start to run a NutriVal. So given his history, we wanted to look at the blood and the urine. We wanted to dive a little bit deeper because most parents of these children that have been given these labels, they know a lot because they read a lot. Nobody cares typically more than them. So we'd already done some other things, and these were things we hadn't done. So then we wanted to see, he has trouble balancing blood sugars, and the mother was telling me that, usually it's what a kid craves, unfortunately. Everyone wants to know what food to take away, and it's usually the ones that activate the opioid receptors, and they have a thing called exomorphins like gluten, dairy, popcorn, rice. So if the kid carries around a bag of bread all day, that's the food they got to take away. If they have to drink milk every meal and that's all they drink, that's probably the worst thing for them. That's what they're craving. And, you know, a smoker craves cigarettes, so you crave what's bad for you typically. So we wanted to work on diet. We always want to work on diet, but we could see that his mitochondria were actually working pretty good. So, but for him though, he was on a drug, and it was a selective norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor. So we can see that the drug is working. And then we can see some of the yeast in the small intestine too, though. And a lot of yeasts, especially Candida, they can like hack into the nervous system and make people crave a lot of stuff too. So they have all the DNA that we do. So I just say they can kind of hack into the system.
Yeah, they're bacteria and yeast and parasites are like the ultimate biohackers.
Yeah, I know, right? So, and that's where for him, we wanted to eliminate the biggest source of fuel for them, which is glucose or sugar. So that's going to be a lot of the grains. And then we could see though his amino acids, essential means you have to have them. These were kind of on the low end, especially this lysine. And that's just important for a lot of amino acid utilization. And amino acids are the building blocks that neurotransmitters are built on. So that's really where we want to make sure that he just has enough. We could see that the cysteine was high. So this is going to indicate, you know, methylation is a big word, but we wanted to make sure that that system was working. And we could also see that his body's most used amino acid, glycine, is low. And glycine is responsible for helping with glutamate GABA imbalances. It becomes red blood cells and cell walls, so it's a pretty critical component. But we could see some antioxidants. This anserine being low, his cell walls were having trouble healing themselves. He had some pretty good fats. Again, the mom was doing fish oils and things like that already, which is the cure for ugly. So it has like 0 side effects, no interactions with medications. I don't know any 6-year-olds on Coumadin, thank God. So I don't think that's going to be an issue. But then we could see that the cell walls, again, these lipid peroxides, so cell walls resting, fats resting. He's having trouble protecting the nervous system because that's where a lot of the fat and fatty cell walls are contained there. But his body's major antioxidant just couldn't keep up with the demand anymore. So we had to make sure that as energy demand increases, so does antioxidant demand, because out of the engine comes exhaust. So we have to deal with that. We have to kind of scrub that out of the cell so that way these cells can keep functioning. And then we did a neuro exam on him too. So with that, we were noticing that he had what's called orbitofrontal issues, which that's the part right here, kind of next to the midline of the brain. That's an inhibitory part of things. So we wanted to make sure that we were activating that part of his brain once we were getting things like blood sugar stabilized. And, you know, you want to line the tires up before you try to hit the gas. And then, of course, there's always a lifestyle component. So there were some issues with some children on the bus. So then they just got a different way to go to school, and that was able to happen. Now, the interesting thing about this is he was diagnosed with ADD and given the Metadate, but the main reason that his parents brought him to me was that he had uncontrolled bowel issues. So that was kind of obviously really impairing the quality of life of not only him, but also of his parents and things like that too. So, you know, there's always going to be that ripple effect of when we see the brain not working potentially 100% of the time.
Okay, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing. And so do you have an update on this child?
Oh yeah, he's off the Metadate. We killed the parasites. He hasn't went to the bathroom. He went once at school, but that was first day back after a vacation. And then there's been some peaks and valleys with him, but the mother told me that now every time she tries to give him the Metadate, it's actually the opposite effect. It makes it worse. And I'm like, yeah, because his brain doesn't need that anymore. So we're pushing too far.
Awesome. And one thing you talked about that I thought was very interesting, you posted this on your Facebook page, and maybe not everyone watching this saw that, but you talked about, you gave a great analogy about how the brain switches tasks to protect itself. Do you want to comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, so if we're dealing with energy production, I say think of it like an exercise. And if I'm doing bicep curls and my biceps get tired or fatigued, I need to switch muscle groups or else I'm going to injure myself. So the brain is just trying to bounce around to protect itself because certain parts of it are going to get tired as they can't meet energy demands. So it switches tasks, just like switch exercise. So it's not actually an issue. And even though we want them to focus, that creates a good baseline. If they can only focus for 38 seconds and then that's it, and then they have to switch, well, now we know, okay, 38 seconds is the time to beat. So it's just really the brain protecting itself. And that's where I feel it can be problematic in the long term, especially if we don't get to the underlying issue. I equate it to, I just ice my biceps or my shoulder after I hurt it, and I just keep doing bicep curls. And now we're forcing a brain to work when it's trying not to, or at least certain parts of neurons are trying to relax, and we're not giving them that chance. The problem is we have what's called the neuroexcitotoxic model of death, meaning when the nervous system gets too excited, it fires too much and it burns out. So then we actually see kind of this loss of function as well too. And to me, that's going to be really problematic as far as developmental. Because there are certain things that have windows, like language. We know once you're kind of after around 13 years old, doesn't matter how well we go, the word count might only be 100 and 120 words, versus things like maybe learning how to properly express emotions. Well, those parts of the brain are plastic and can be, worked on for life.
Now, what would you say to parents who have healthy children? What are some of the things that you do to help raise Adeline in a healthy way? And we're not just talking about, functional medicine concepts. What lifestyle practices do you guys do at home? And I'll be happy to share some of mine as well. They're probably very similar to yours, but why don't you share some of that as well?
Well, the first thing is we practice like good mindset before we go to bed. We ask her, who was nice to you? Who are you nice to? And what did you learn today? So we work on a lot of subconscious work, as well as just getting her to learn how to relax. Kids are good. They're too good at being stressed out. Their brain is so plastic for that we need to teach them how to relax. To me, that's huge. We've eliminated all blue light in our house, not a speck. So you've been over. The only time she's exposed to it is during daycare. So trying to work on that. They think I'm crazy, but and then just maintaining a lot of the good dietary habits. I mean, she gets DHA, a fish oil, every day. She gets a certain probiotic called Megaspore every day. And then just allowing her immune system to be able to do its job too. So whenever she gets a runny, snuffy nose, I say, good, she's getting sick. That's what the immune system is designed to do, is fight. I only get worried if after maybe 5 days her nose is still running, we're still having a cough, then okay, her immune system's losing. But she's never had to be on a round of antibiotics or anything like that. So really avoidance is going to be key. And that's where I just say, if your kid is doing good, don't be lax. And don't necessarily think just because you're giving them a supplement, that's the best thing. Like I heard a lady tell me the other day, oh, I gave my grandson some tart cherry juice and he fell asleep through the night because he hasn't been sleeping through the night. And, red flags are going off in the back of my head, like, whoa, a kid's not sleeping all the way through night. And it started when he was 3. So I was just like, I'm glad you're sleeping, or I'm glad he's sleeping. But it really upsets me, or it really worries me that you have to give them something to help them fall asleep. That shouldn't be happening at 3 years old or any time. So just avoidance of a lot of these lights, a lot of electronics and things like that too. We have salt rocks everywhere in our house just because we try to maintain or eliminate a lot of that type of exposure. And the only time that me and my wife have autoimmunity, and my wife has celiac, for example. So the only time she's ever actually eaten gluten was one time they accidentally gave it to her at daycare. So we've already avoided a lot of the food triggers and these processed foods. Dr. Berardi said it really good a long time ago. If it's in a box or a bag, it's bad for you. If it says it's good for you, it's bad for you.
Yeah, simple advice there. I appreciate that. One other thing that, I'll add to that, my son wears glasses. So we've actually had a blue light filter put onto his glasses. So that benefits him as well. We use, we keep the room as dark as possible. I know you guys do as well. So you want to keep the room like a cave. And you want to make sure the temperature is not super warm, because that could be a problem for children. Another thing for children too, just to keep in mind for everyone, is they breathe more often than an adult does. Their heart rate is faster than an adult as well. And then a lot of people will buy a new mattress and new furniture and all this new stuff for their children. And a lot of these materials have fire retardants in them. And these are obviously, accumulating toxins in that person's bloodstream. So you want to try to buy organic materials as much as possible that, have natural fire retardants instead of toxic fire retardants. So I just wanted to kind of add that in there for those of you. And another thing to do is have a switch on your Wi-Fi. So your Wi-Fi turns off every night. So you're not, unnaturally bathing in this EMF signals. And of course, my son has been trained. I can't keep the phone away from him because, I use my phone and I'd be very hypocritical, but we do get him to immediately put it into airplane mode if he's using it. So he's been conditioned and trained to do that so that he's not being exposed to the EMF as well. So these are some things that are often overlooked. Again, these are health optimization tips, and certainly the same tips that apply for health optimization are going to apply to reverse a chronic health issue that somebody might have as well. I do want to encourage anyone to ask questions. There's quite a few of you on the call here, so feel free to type in your questions and I'll be able to answer those. But let's go into nutrition, because we talked about things you avoid, but what's an example of like what Addie has for breakfast and lunch and dinner? I know that when Devin goes to school, he goes to a private school and the school provides lunch, but we're the only family in the whole school that actually provides his lunch for him. And I know you guys, because of, again, not the dietary restrictions, and we don't want to call them restrictions, these are dietary preferences. And so because of our dietary preferences for our children and for ourselves as well, of course, we have to lead by example. What are some things that you would have for breakfast, lunch, and or dinner?
So actually this breakfast this morning was paleo pancakes, which are made out of plantains and eggs with the Lakanto Lohango syrup with some peanut butter and cinnamon on top of it. And then she liked a protein shake today too. So we have a little greens powder and a plant-based protein that she likes to drink. Lunch is going to be leftover steak, grass-fed obviously, with some leftover organic mashed potatoes. I'm Irish, so potatoes are like a staple in our household. And then some broccoli and some yellow squash. So, and that's where we want to, even if it's, we buy everything organic. To me, it's worth way more than 38 extra cents per pound of meat. Because glyphosate's just ubiquitous in our society. I mean, people pay money to have it sprayed on the yards their kids play on. And I know we're kind of off tracking from diet, but oh my gosh. And then, and snacks might be maybe like she likes applesauce a lot too. So we actually try to give her avocados and a lot of good fats too. So really whatever she eats, as long as we kind of pair, I don't want to say pair macronutrients. I don't like to do a lot of that stuff, but as long as she eats a balanced meal and we're stabilizing blood sugars, to me, that's really the most important thing. We set aside time to eat. So no TV or anything like that. We're sitting down at that meal focused on eating. And I think that's a big problem too, because they're just kind of absent whenever they're eating. And now nothing below the diaphragm is really going to do its job.
Yeah, one thing I'll add to everyone related to diet is getting your children to chew their food. And so it's, some people like to talk at the dinner table. I prefer not to speak during dinner. I just try to silently eat my meal because I want to focus on chewing. And one way to encourage your children to chew better is to actually show them when they go to the bathroom what's ending up in their stool. So Devin, for example, and of course, most children don't aggressively and adequately chew their food enough. So we'll show him little bits of carrots that are in his stool that are just floating around there, not to get too graphic, but this is a great way to teach your children if they're chewing enough. And as adults, this is a great litmus test as well. If you see a salad in the toilet, you're probably not chewing your food properly. And I explained to him in very easy layman's terms that if you want to unlock the nutrition in plants, you actually have to break open the cell wall. And the best, and really the only way to do that, because we lack the enzyme cellulase, is to actually chew that food. And they get it, guys. Like, they totally understand this. And they like when you share this kind of information because we're a self-preserving species. And so we like to know things that are going to actually help us and make us healthier and make us function better. And just on the topic of food, I want to add this, that when, it's tempting when you go to birthday parties, and I'm not going to sit here on my high horse and pretend like Devin is perfect, okay? Because he isn't. And that's not the expectation. The expectation is for him to be resilient and to be able to tolerate certain foods when he consumes them, assuming they're not going to kill him, of course. So he will have the occasional cake, but we try to be as gluten-free as possible, and it's 99.9% of the time. So we usually bring our own cake to the birthday party. Our friends are kind of aware now that we're gluten-free, so they'll order, mind you, it's a pizza, but it's a gluten-free pizza, so they're mindful of that, and we appreciate them for being mindful and catering to that need that and preference that we have. The other thing too is that with kids, with Devin especially, he loves superheroes. I mean, who doesn't? So he's a big fan of the Avengers, and one of the things that we tell him is that there's a certain way that these superheroes eat, and if you want to be a superhero, you've got to eat a certain way. Otherwise, you're going to be weak, and you're not going to be able to help people and save people's lives, if you will. And of course, we have to lead by example. So our children are not going to do something that we ourselves are not doing, because the first language is actually action. The universal language is action. If I see somebody doing something, it doesn't matter what language they speak, because I'm visually seeing it. And of course, we have mirror neurons, so it's easy for people to mimic what other people are doing. And so I want to encourage all of you parents who are watching this to lead by example. You play a super, super important role. And trust me, your kids are watching you. I mean, this. Your kids are watching you, and it's very important that we lead. Our leadership is through example and really nothing else, because we can't really tell anyone to do something unless we ourselves are doing it.
Also, to kind of touch sleep, back to the sleep, it's also the time too. Like, I'm a lion like you, so we get up early. I go to bed when my daughter goes to bed at like 9, and she'll sleep till like 7. But I'll be getting up early, and I see people's kids like awake, and they're leaving by the time we're just starting to have Adeline get out of bed. And the only time that the brain really recharges is when they're asleep. So I think, and some schools are starting to catch on. They're maybe pushing classes back a little bit later. I tell people there's no good reason to beat the sun up. In my opinion, time's an invention. Time on the phone's an invention. Time is in the sky. That's what our body knows, is sunlight. So we really try to encourage following the circadian rhythm and not forcing kids to be awake whenever they're not supposed to be, because you can never catch up on sleep. Your body just kind of goes into this sleep debt, and it constantly just tries to pay it off by decreasing function during the day. You got to save it from somewhere, right?
Yeah, that's super important. Actually, one of my greatest hacks, and you just mentioned it, is going to bed with my son. So when Devin goes to bed, as many nights as I'm home, I will put him to bed. And usually that's somewhere between 8 and 9 o'clock, usually closer to 8:30. And, there's nothing important going on in my life after 8:30, because my son is asleep at that point. And the work that I do is going to be very ineffective after 8:30, because as a lion, and for those of you that don't know this reference, there is a great book called The Power of When. You can actually take a quiz. It's called The Power of When quiz. So Michael Bruce basically describes 4 different chronotypes. So some people are going to be most effective in the morning. Some people are going to be most effective in the evening. Some people midday. And so based on your chronotype, you might want to adjust what type of activities you do, because you're going to be more impactful, or it's going to be much better for your circadian biology. And this kind of makes sense. I was talking about this when I was in Costa Rica at the talk I gave. This makes sense in a community setting, because a community has to be on alert, if you will, 24/7. So you've got some people that are going to be most vigilant in the morning. You've got some people are going to be most vigilant and active midday, later in the day, and then some people are going to be kind of night owls. So understanding, where you are in that chronobiology can be very important. And so I do want to let you guys both know that Jared and I are both lions. So we're early risers. Like, I'm usually up by 4:30, and then I have to kind of force myself to go back to bed a little bit so I don't wake up the whole house. And after 8:30, I'm pretty much done. So the only thing I can do after 8:30 is watch TV, and I barely watch an hour of TV a week. So, just something for you guys to keep in mind is that the recommendations we're giving are specific to us. You might have different things that work for you, but certainly for your child, it's important that you get them to bed and they stay asleep the whole night. I mean, 12 hours is kind of what we shoot for with Devin. He gets about 11 right now. So he's in bed at 8:30, wakes up about 7:30. And on weekends, we let him sleep in a little bit if he needs to, because again, that's when we repair. It's when we heal. And we've adjusted our personal lives as well. So, we've built and created a business around our life instead of a life around our business. And even the people that work on our team, we take into account what their chronobiology is, because I expect people to do their best work always. And if somebody's coming in super early, but they're a bear, then it's not going to work, right? They're not going to do their best work because they're not awake just yet. So we keep that in mind. I want you guys to keep that in mind. The quiz is called the Power of When quiz. You can Google it, and within a few minutes, you can find out what your chronotype is. Shannon Stark says her girls sleep in a hammock. That's super cool. I'm going to have to try that. That's awesome. And again, guys, if you have any questions, then feel free to ask. Jared, was there any other tips you wanted to provide us in terms of helping children stay healthy? Any parental advice that you could give for all of us?
And avoid injecting heavy metals under the skin to the bloodstream. If I wanted to ruin the brain, then that's the first thing I would do.
Okay. So we'll leave that at that. That's a whole different conversation. But yeah, don't inject preservatives, heavy metals, foreign food proteins into your child, or don't inject them into yourself. And you can take that for what it's worth. I certainly wouldn't do it, and I don't inject anything into myself. So I'm certainly not going to inject poisons into myself or into my family. Okay, so Megan asks, you were talking about a child who had critters, and she was wondering what your thoughts were on helminth therapy.
Oh, helminth therapy can be good. It's just there's not really a lot of controlled sources that I know of. So like a probiotic, a helminth is a pro-parasite, just for those of you that don't know. So I find there's actually in the research a lot of great literature concerning helminths and the use of autoimmunity and autism. It's just, so I think that was in reference. No, he wasn't taking helminth therapies, and that's how he didn't get the critters. So.
Okay, great. And then one of the things that I use that we didn't talk about just yet are essential oils. So a couple of weeks ago, Devin came in with, he came in and he was doing this with his ear. And he just had his ear his finger in his ear the whole car ride home. And we're like, man, he's quiet, which is very unusual. And so he had probably the starts of maybe an ear infection. God knows what it was. We certainly weren't going to wait and find out. So the first, here were the things that I did. I first adjusted him. So I evaluated his atlas and mobilized his neck. Very simple, very light, non-invasive adjustment. And we put a combination of lavender and tea tree oil, and we diluted that. So we didn't use it neat, but we put a few drops of that into his ear, diluted in fractionated coconut oil. And then we set him on biomat, which is a far infrared mat. And I didn't force him to go to sleep, because you tell this guy to go to sleep and he's going to fight you. And I said, just rest and don't move. And of course, naturally, he fell asleep. And he woke up about 2 hours later, and he didn't even know which ear it was. So I just want to let you guys know that there's a lot of things that you can do as a parent that don't require you running to the doctor. And we believe that the doctor of the future is you, the patient, and the mom. There's nobody better to take care of your children than Dr. Mom and Dr. Dad. You just have to know where to turn for some of these things. And I did a whole webinar on essential oils for children. We also diffuse lavender oil in his room at night, so he gets a much deeper, more restful sleep, and that's proven to be quite effective as well. So there's a few things that we can do from a natural intervention standpoint. And I also put frankincense oil on the bottom of his feet every night before he goes to bed, and he loves it. He just he waits for it every single day. And knock on wood, he's been healthy, and he's never been to the doctor. He doesn't even have a pediatrician, because he's got us. He's got his parents looking after him. Nobody's going to look after your kids better than you. And, that's why we're doing this. So I want to encourage all of you to really make that conscious effort to take care of your children and do what's right for them and do what's best for them, and seek the information that's out there. And, certainly if you need to see a physician, go and see them. If you're not getting the results that you're hoping for, or you feel that there's a misalignment between what you're looking for and what the practitioner is providing, or if you feel like you've exhausted all of your options, start with diet, start with lifestyle, start with, the fundamentals. but we're happy to help and dig a little bit deeper should we need to, because you can't look at a child and know that they have a pathogenic overgrowth. You can't look at a child and know that their mitochondria is not functioning properly, or they've got a small intestinal overgrowth going on. And now with more and more children being on antibiotics from a very young age, or not being born via the vaginal canal, there's a huge disruption in that gut microbiome. And the gut microbiome is where 99% of our genetic information is actually housed. And if your child is born C-section, which my son was, so Devin was born C-section, unfortunately, there was a turn of events that took place and it was out of our control at that point. But, when that happens, you have to realize that the first bacteria that person is going to be exposed to is that of a hospital worker. And so we took some very, very meticulous steps in ensuring that he got the bacteria that he needed. He was actually, in our case, Deepa was unable to breastfeed for about a month because she was in the hospital. She had ended up having a bowel obstruction post-surgery. And so for a month, he was bottle fed. He was fed formula. And, it was kind of disheartening for us. And Deepa was actually told she'd never get her milk supply back, but I said, not on my watch. So we were able to restore her milk supply, and she breastfed him for 2.5 years. And we've been giving him probiotics, exposing him to dirt, getting him in the sun. He's a beach boy. He loves the beach, as my friends in Costa Rica and Mexico and everyone will attest to. And so we try to get him out there, get him playing, get him active, get him dirty. Don't be such a germaphobe. These things are not serving our children. They're actually potentially harming our children and making them much less resilient to things. And, again, the goal here is to work with your body, not to work against it. And we're resilient as human beings. I mean, we have so much resilience. And, I pack him in ice. I shared a video about this with everyone. We expose him to cold therapy. He takes cold showers. And the reason he does that is because he sees us doing it. Right? He sees myself and he sees Deepa doing these things. And of course, he's going to engage in these behaviors because they love role modeling parents. So my message to all of you is, be a role model for your children. And it's just going to be absolutely incredible to see what happens with these. You don't have to tell them anything. They're just going to follow the things that you do because that's the way they know the world works. And one critical thing that we didn't really touch too much on is the subconscious programming, which takes place between the age of 0 and 7. So this window of time between age 0 and 7 is when their understanding of the world forms. So their understanding of relationships, of communication, of finances and money, and their understanding of food, and who's nice and who isn't nice. All of these things they're absorbing, and they're not articulating these things necessarily, but these things might come back to haunt them when they're adults. So how you communicate with your children between the age of 0 and 7 is extremely, extremely important and often overlooked. And we kind of end up cleaning up this mess when we see our patients because they're dealing with a lot of subconscious childhood issues. But if you have young children, then just keep that in mind. A good book to read on this topic is The Biology of Belief by Bruce Lipton. And I did an interview with him. I highly encourage you guys go to our YouTube page and find that because it was quite powerful. And then another thing I wanted to mention and just kind of throw this out there is that a lot of times adults or children. Let me backtrack. So a lot of times children get way more attention when they're sick. There's a disparaging difference between how much attention a child gets when they're well and functioning optimally and how much attention they get when they're unwell. And the subconscious message is that if I want attention, I need to be sick. So as adults, sometimes the child brain, the infant brain, the subconscious brain will create illness to get attention. So just something for the adults to keep in mind out there. If your parents were super attention giving when you were ill and unwell, and that's the only time when you got a disproportionate amount of attention as a child when you were sick, then this could manifest as adult illnesses that, again, when we're sick as adults, we get a lot more attention from people. People are asking us how we are. We get well cards. We get all this, attention. So I just wanted to throw some of these things out there for those of you that are watching us. Did you want to add anything?
Well, I was going to say we did get a couple questions. Tara said, how do you help a young child 7 with anxiety that results in anger during stressful times in school? So the first thing I would do is try to teach them how to relax, like a meditation or something like that. And usually with anger, it's a dopamine type issue. They're depleting dopamine to make adrenaline. And one of the best ways to preserve dopamine is to balance blood sugars. So that's where really making sure that the blood sugars are stable. Those would be just some of the first things I would start to focus on, is teach them how to relax and make sure that they're eating the right foods at the right time, which kind of pairs into the next question. Megan said, can you elaborate on why you don't like to pair macronutrients? I didn't necessarily mean that. I love to pair them. To me, I don't like to make food the enemy. I don't like to say the word pair macronutrients, because people are going to wonder, well, is it 33% carbs and protein and fat, or is it a 60-30-20 or whatever? So I just usually let Adeline kind of eat what she wants to, as long as it's just not fruit, because she likes to do that.
Jaylene Black asks, do you use a sound machine to help children sleep? Absolutely, yes. Actually, it's funny because one of the gifts that I've received, or Devin received as a child when he was born, was a sound machine from my friend Dr. Ammer, Fuad Ammer. So shout out to him. And it's the one gift that he's used every single day of his life. So, big shout out to him there. And of course, we've received many gifts for him, but my wife and I commented on that just a couple of weeks ago, that this is the one thing that he's used every single day his entire life. And for those of you that don't know where I live on a relatively busy street. So something we're looking to change here pretty soon, but there's cars that come by and stuff like that. So a sound machine really helps. And especially if you've got children that, we live in a 1,000 square foot condo, so we don't have a lot of space. So if somebody's outside of the room making noise, then it's going to be disruptive to him. So a sound machine can be a great, adjunct to helping children sleep. That white noise can be quite powerful. And there's different sounds. You can have a heartbeat sound, you can have water splashing sounds, you can have a car sound if you want. So there's all these different sounds that can be quite beneficial for children.
About back to the blue light, we had a question for the resources to learn about it. And I just use PubMed, so I'm not like a book kind of guy. But that's where the bulbs, I believe, are Westinghouse amber bulbs. You can just get them on Amazon. So to me, that was honestly one of the coolest things we ever saw happen. We installed them, and then that day, about 30 minutes before we used to try to struggle to get Addie to go to bed, she's just like, Dad, I'm tired, let's go to bed. And I was just like, oh, best money I ever spent was getting those amber lights put in, for sure.
Diana asks, she's commenting on the 0 to 7, the ways we're taught to communicate and think. How do we change that? The most effective way that I've seen, Diana, is hypnotherapy. And you basically go back into this trance-like state, and you're rewriting the operating system. So just like your phone updates its operating system every few months, seems like every week in some cases, but just like that operating system updates, you want to update your operating system now. So an example for me is, my parents were immigrants. We grew up in kind of a very scarcity type of mindset. And so my money mindset was like totally way off. And so as an adult, I would immediately dart to the clearance section because we would never buy anything at retail price. So that's just a really simple example. But, my parents were loving, they were very caring, they were very nurturing. They always provided us with everything we needed. So I didn't have any issues there, but like my money mindset was way off. And, that was something that was holding me back in my life. And I had to do a lot of subconscious reprogramming around that. Another thing to look into is your child's love language. So Gary Chapman he wrote an excellent book called The 5 Love Languages. And as adults, and here coming back to the inner child, as adults, we will crave the things that our parents never gave us. So my love language as an adult is words of affirmation and touch. So my parents were not huggy, touchy, feely, kissy type of people. And so now that's what I crave, right? And my parents were not people that motivated us through affirmation. So if I still remember, I got 98 on my high school algebra course, and my dad's like, where's the 2%? So that was the type of affirmations we got, that it was things were never good enough. And so some of these things can serve us. It serves me in my business because I'm always looking to improve and optimize and do things a little bit better. But as adults, we'll tend to crave, our love language will be the things that we didn't get as children. So Deepa's love language is acts of service and quality time, right? So maybe those were things that she needed more of as a child. And so, this can contribute to adult miscommunications and relationship issues, which of course our children are observing. So, getting that dialed in as parents can be extremely, extremely important. Okay, let's see if we have any other questions that pop up. Zinat uses a sound machine. Awesome. Thanks for sharing. And LaToya had a question. She's got a 15-month-old baby, and she's been having a fever. And she took the baby to the doctor, who gave him antibiotics and said that it may be tonsillitis. So again, kind of guessing here. She's not a fan of Western medicine. I'm not going to comment on that, but she's big on natural remedies, and I'm a Young Living member, so she uses essential oils, which is great. And should I continue with the antibiotics? I strictly breastfeed. LaToya, I would love to advise you, but I really can't, because we don't have any other history besides what you're offering us. I would say that that's a conversation for you and the prescribing physician. But you're the mom. I mean, it's your child, so you got to do what you feel is most right for this child. And anytime a child has any type of infection, is it the infection or is it the inability for the immune system to deal with the infection? That's something for us to take into consideration. So a really good oil from Young Living is the thieves oil. So you might want to try that, maybe nebulizing or diffusing that. But I wouldn't do that in lieu of the antibiotics, because it might be something that's really necessary. I would definitely work on finding a chiropractor in your area that can probably do an adjustment of the cranium and also of the upper cervical spine, because that can get things moving and fluids moving through the eustachian tubes and the rest of the system. So I would definitely highly recommend and look into that if you're looking for a natural alternative. And once you start the antibiotic, you want to continue the full course. And what I would probably suggest is taking some sort of probiotic. We use Megaspore. I use that with my son. Jared uses it with his daughter. We use it. That's our #1 selling product in our entire inventory. So we do recommend it quite often to our patients. So I would probably look into that if possible. And you can actually just take a capsule and make a paste out of it and rub it on your, you can rub it into the baby's mouth, or you can rub it on your breast, and then the baby's being breastfed, they're going to get these spores into their system. Anything you want to add to that, Jared?
No, I think the baby's too young to snort any of the Megaspore to try to get it in the nasal cavity. So we just, keep it through the oral cavity.
Megan also asks, can you give a good resource to learn more about blue light? We have Flux on our devices, but I think we need to step it up a notch. Blue light is ubiquitous, and you don't want to be afraid of blue light all the time, because there's certain times when blue light can actually be therapeutic and beneficial, but you want to make sure that you're certainly not exposed to it at the wrong time of day. So instead of avoiding blue light as your strategy, try to get more natural sunlight. That would probably be your primary strategy. And then try to use, amber bulbs at home. So if you come to my house in the evening, it's like super yellow, because, that's the natural, we have 2 Rolexes, they're called our eyes, and that's what keeps time. Really fascinating story. I didn't realize this, but it makes total sense when you think about it. But at the equator, the day and night are 12 hours, and the time and length of day never changes. So when we were in Costa Rica a couple of weeks ago, the length of the day and night were almost identical, and the rising and setting of the sun only had about a 10 to 15 minute fluctuation throughout the entire year. So you can really dial in your circadian rhythm there. I'm in Ontario, Jared's in Cincinnati. We can't do that because the time of day, length of day changes pretty much every single day. And so one way to do that is to certainly you want to turn off as many lights as possible in the evening. Certainly you want to turn off overhead lighting in the evening, because the brain also keeps track of, where shadows are and how shadows are being cast, not just the frequency and temperature of the light. And then you can try using candles and try to just keep it as dark as humanly possible. If you have blackout shades, then you can regulate the light in your house much better. So even if it's still relatively bright outside, you can start turning off the lights and closing the shades and using salt lamps or candles instead. Okay. Did you see any other questions pop up, brother?
No, sir.
No? Okay. So we've gone an hour, which is awesome. I appreciate you sharing this hour with us and sharing all this knowledge and information. If you guys found this helpful, we just loved some hearts and likes to know that this information was beneficial for you. And certainly This topic is of great interest to me and Dr. Seigler, because we both have young children, and clearly many of you watching, I can see from your Facebook pictures, you have young children as well. And, we just love knowing that these small changes can have such a profound impact on, a child's health, because they're going to benefit from this information for an entire lifetime, instead of suffering from this lack of information for an entire lifetime. And children are amazing. They're so resilient. They bounce back really quickly. You're going to see changes in your child, within a couple of days, sometimes within the same day, sometimes within a couple of weeks at most, but they respond really, really well. So keep that in mind. If you're trying to make some healthy changes, you're going to see some results very quickly. So, Jared, was there anything you wanted to add in closing?
Well, Zinat was asking how to encourage more foods. Usually that might be a sensory issue. So that to me is maybe like look for magnesium to see if there's potentially any magnesium issues affecting the brain, which would affect sensation. But yeah, last but not least, we always talk about the importance of breastfeeding, but for the microbiome to actually mature and realize it has to do this on its own, they have to stop breastfeeding too. So the sensation of breast milk is kind of that signal that, all right, I'm no longer just dependent on mom anymore, because that's when we got a lot of the immune factors still through breast milk.
Okay, and LaToya asks, I chose not to vaccinate my baby. The pediatrician gave us 6 months to change our minds or find another one. Is that a topic you guys can touch on? All I will say is that neither one of our children are vaccinated, and I'll just kind of leave it at that. So I always tell parents to do their own research and make their own decisions, but also realize that keeping a child healthy isn't whether you vaccinate or not vaccinate. I think there's a lot more to keeping your children healthy. So, the idea here isn't just to avoid something and then not do other things. I mean, as you've probably learned through this conversation, we do a lot of things to take care of ourselves personally and to protect our children. You really have to protect your children from the establishment, is kind of my take on things. And, if we're as adults trying to avoid the medical system, then the last thing we want to do is engage them in the medical system unnecessarily. So I'll just leave it at that. I don't want to make this a political dialogue, but I wouldn't be too worried if I were you, as long as you're doing some of the other things that you should be doing. And then Samar asks, is there any advice for a dyslexic child? You want to comment on that?
So with dyslexia, that's where we start to wonder about the occipital lobe potentially. So that's where I would say find a functional neurologist in the area, somebody that knows how to evaluate the brain, but also what is the brain being affected by, because dyslexia can have a lot of different pathways on why someone's not seeing what they're supposed to be seeing. So that's kind of one of those broader type questions that I just love to answer and say, hey, yeah, do this and it'll be fixed. But unfortunately, something like that won't work that easily.
And Jaylene asks, she and her 2 children have severe clinical sleep issues. What advice can we give? I mean, when all family members are affected by something, I start thinking of something systemic. So I might start looking at or investigating for mold. If you've had any water damage in your space, then I would definitely take that into consideration and evaluate that a little bit more closely. If you notice that when you travel, you feel better, that might be a hidden sign that there could be something environmental going on. If you feel worse when you're at home, obviously that's a huge red flag for us. So just keep that in mind. Water damage is huge, and you can get a test called an ERMI test, which can assess for any mold spores in your home. And I'll go back later on and I'll post some links in here in response to that. I just can't do it while we're on the live call. And then Sonia asks, how can I get an 11-month-old to eat solids?
Well, the first thing I would say is, do they have teeth? So, because to me, that's a big sign. Like, I love Weston A. Price, but I have to disagree with like blending up meat, because if a child doesn't have teeth, the GI tract is not ready for that. So they kind of eat at their own pace. The biggest thing, it might be, don't make it a thing. And that's what I say, because the brain has this feed forward mechanism. So the further you push for them to do something, the harder they're going to push back to not do something and be resistant. That's unfortunately just the way anyone's brain kind of works for the most part. So if it's just not something they're ready to do, then they'll be ready at that time. So kind of timing is everything. And then I also saw a 2-year-old that seems anxious and startles easily, just a heightened stress response. So why can't the body shut off the stress response? And that's where you have to figure out what's stressing out the body, because a noise, I mean, shouldn't be startling a 2-year-old.
Yeah, and one of the things that we might want to investigate, Christy, is what was the stress level of the mom during pregnancy, because some children, if the mom is under a lot of stress, they're going to be under the impression epigenetically that they're going to be raised in a very stressful environment. So they're going to be finer tuned for that, for stress. Another thing to take into consideration is what breaks down our catecholamines. Magnesium breaks down catecholamines as well as SAMe. So looking at the methylation pathways a little bit more closely might be of value and of benefit. And there are genetic testing. There are genetic tests that can be done on a child. I mean, I've had my genetic test done, Deepa has had her test done, and Devin has had genetic testing done. So we can look at his methylation pathways to see if there's anything there that needs to be addressed. And so certainly, if there's a genetic predisposition to poor catecholamine metabolism, then the child is going to have a heightened stress response. Their stress bucket's going to stay full. So even one little drop of water can overflow that bucket. And then if they're not breaking it down adequately, then they're going to stay in that heightened stress response more often for a longer period of time. So look into, I would definitely look into methylation a little bit more closely to see if there's something there going on. And then, just keep in mind that the allostatic load of a child is what fills up that stress bucket as well. So look at other stressors, like what's filling up that bucket, and then how efficiently is that bucket being emptied are kind of two different questions, but they're part of the same problem. Anything you wanted to add to that?
Not to that one, but Amanda was asking her 6-year-old has ASD, a bunch of supplements. She quit everything except probiotics, multivitamin, fish oil, and mineral. Seems to be functioning really well. His biggest issue is functional speech. And that's where, kind of like a dyslexia issue, speech is actually a pathway in the brain. It's not just like Wernicke and Broca's areas. So that's where, again, finding someone that knows what they're doing to properly do what's called a neurological exam. Whenever we start to see specific pathways of the brain not really tracking with the rest of it developing like we would expect, that's when we might want to consider just focusing on kind of activating or exercising those certain parts of the brain. So that way now we're seeing speech start to develop. So some of it can be prefrontal cortex issues. Some of it could maybe be some temporal lobe dysfunction as well. So that's where just, figuring out what exact part of the brain is maybe not firing or regulating itself as well as the rest of it, and then be able to figure out how to exercise that part of the brain.
So you've mentioned functional neurology a couple of times, and I know you're training right now to become a diplomate in functional neurology, which I admire you for. Where is a resource or a website where people can find a functional neurologist? Any comments on that? Is there a website that people can locate?
Yeah, there is actually. It's called IAFNR, is if you want to score some on the street corner, but it's International Association of Functional Neurology and Rehabilitation, IAFNR. And they have a list of doctors. And that's part of the thing, is we're trying to also help people find doctors in the area that know what they do. Because I've had like this one lady, she drove from North Carolina to bring her autistic sons to see me. And that sounded kind of cool, but I thought, why do you have to go all the way from a Carolina to Cincinnati to get, this kind of approach for your children? It shouldn't be that difficult, in my opinion. So that's where it's iafnr.org. And that was made, it was started by Dr. Robert Melillo, and he's the one that started the Brain Balance Centers. So it all kind of started with Dr. Carrick and kind of trickled down from there. And I'm currently working under the seminars that Dr. Karazian and Dr. Brock are doing as far as functional neurology.
I'm just sharing that with everybody, so you can see that website and click on that. You can find somebody local to you. Certainly, we do work with clients remotely, but we always try to find somebody close to you first, because yes, people trust us and they value the information that we offer, but we don't want to add additional stress to your family and the cost of traveling if it's unnecessary. So find somebody locally and interview them. You're making an important life-changing decision for yourself and your child. So make sure you thoroughly interview this person and make sure their viewpoints are aligned. They're aligned with yours and they're congruent with yours. And of course, make sure that person is interested in your best long-term results, not just short-term results. And it's super critical. I think there's only about 6 functional neurologists in all of Ontario. So to service like 12 million people, there's 1 functional neurologist for every 2 million people in Ontario. So it's not something that's easy to find. We recommend our clients here in Ontario see Dr. Burness. He's located in Oakville. And then if you're in the Ohio area, certainly Dr. Seigler can be of great benefit and of great value, but check out the website to see if you can find somebody geographically closer to you. And then if not, then maybe we can then at that point discuss travel. But, I would say that it's always best to find somebody locally. And LaToya is in New York. You should be, I'm assuming New York City, not New York State, but you should be able to find somebody out there. I don't know anyone. I don't know if you have anyone that you've vetted out there in New York, but I know there are some functional neurologists out there.
LaToya, private message me and I'll let you know. His name is Dr. Michael Gruta. I always butcher his last name, but he's been a diplomate since '91. So he's been around the block, a lot of clinical experience. And his clinic is set up to have a lot of the fancy machines to be able to actually geographically map active and underactive like parts of the brain to see about balance and firing and symmetry.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't even think of that. He's in Long Island, so definitely worth the drive. He's done some amazing work, and he's our friends on Facebook, so you should be able to find him. Dr. Michael G. Just a phenomenal guy, and he's a pioneer in this and doing it for many, many years. And he's also trained in functional medicine. So you're lucky to be within his vicinity, and I would definitely encourage that you check him out. Okay. I don't think we missed anyone's questions. We still have quite a few people on the call. I'm going to give you guys a minute to post any questions that you have, and then we've got to get back to saving the world. So go right ahead and type those questions in or show us some love. If you enjoyed this presentation, we'd love your feedback as well. My love language is affirmation. What are your love languages, Jared?
Mine are touch and quality time.
Okay. All right. We're getting some love. Can't reach through the phone and hug you, but I appreciate you doing all this, and go and spend some quality time with Julie if she's at the office, and give the family a big hug and kiss from me.
Always do. See you, brother.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jared. I appreciate it.
Bye, everyone.